In today's video, we are going to look at the game of two players rated below 2000 and above 1900 with white 1905 rating with black 1971. This game was played in King's Indian Defend. And in this game, we are going to understand the threats of your opponents when he make a move to understand that what concept he had in his mind and how to counter it. This is what we are going to learn in this today's video. So d4, knight f6, d4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, e4, the strat is e5, so d6, knight ge2, white wants to play whether to f4 or g3, knight g3, castle, and this is the King's Indian Defense actually. And here, now black wants to develop his knight, but here white played the move knight to g3. And here white wants to play the move bishop e2, developing his bishop. There are many ways to counter it. Whether you can play the move bishop to g4 and exchange the bishops, light square bishops, which are the greatest defender of white's king side in King's Indian Defense. Or you can play the move c5, immediately challenging the center. But what black played in this position was queen e8, a very dubious move. What was he thinking actually? The best move in this position was for black was whether to play the move c5 or bishop to g4, exchanging up the bishops. But now here black is threatening to play the move h5. How to counter it? And f3 by white. Now white has weakened his dark squares. g1, f2, e3. And there was no need to weaken the dark squares. The best move in this position was to play the move bishop e2, developing your bishop. That was the best move. But he went out for f3. Now white wants to develop his bishop to e3. What is your move? It's time to counter the center. Now black is threatening to take the pawn. And here black also want to place the move knight e6. Then he wants to play the pawn to c6, then knight to c7. How to counter it? White played the move d5. Why d5? Just keep the center in the position alive. But okay, he went out for the move d5. Now c6 countering the center, bishop e3 developing the bishop, and c into d5. Why to release the tension in the center when there is nothing happening? Develop your pieces. The best move in this position is knight to a6. Think you don't know the understanding, you don't know this position. You are on the initial stage of the game, just develop your pieces. But he took the pawn, and after c to d5, what has happened? Now white is threatening to play the move knight b5, threatening this pawn on d6, threatening this c7, pinning this queen and rook, and white is threatening to pick up this pawn on a7. And then white is saying that I'm going to bring the rook to c1. Now see this one queen move from over here, d8 to e8. How much problem it has created for black. But what black did in this position? He just played the move h5. Now he's threatening to play the move h4. Okay, pause the video and think that black's threat is he is going to play the move h4. You can counter it by playing the move h4 yourself, or you can just develop your bishop to d3 or bishop to b5, or you can develop your knight over here to b5, threatening this pawn, and still saying that I'm going to pin the queen and the rook. Which move is the best one? And the best move in this position was actually knight to b5, threatening the pawns. Because now if he plays the move h4, you can just bring, sorry, you can just first play the move knight to c7, threatening the queen and the rook. The queen gets out of the harm's way, queen d8. How to continue? Knight into a8, picking up the rook for this knight. But in the game, he played h4. Okay, this is okay. Move also. But now a6. And now white is saying that I am going to play the move bishop g5, bishop d3. It has a lot of moves. Queen d2 controlling this diagonal. Then he wants to castle. This is white's plan. And black is threatening to play the move queen e8, d8 again, protecting this pawn and controlling this diagonal. And this is black's threat, playing the move queen e8. How to counter it? The best move in this position was, he played the move a4. The best move was bringing the rook over here to open file. That was the best move. And black tries to counter it, knight pd7. Now you develop your bishop. He plays the move b6, wants to develop his bishop. What to do? Go for castle. Then queen to d8, and he is controlling this square. This was the best continuation, but still a4 is a good move. Now the threat is playing the move a5 and then developing the knight this way. Now white's threat is playing the move a5. How to counter it? He wants to bring his knight to this b6 square. How to counter it? And the best move in this position was for black, queen to d8. But instead, he went out to play the move knight h7. This was the losing move of the game. Because till the end, this knight was unable to come to the game with tempo. This knight is doing nothing. This square is being blocked, g5 square. He has already moved from f6. He is just threatening to play the move f5. Okay. Now you know that knight h7 move was not good and black is threatening to play the move f5. How to counter it? Bishop d3. Okay. Good. Now white is saying that I am going to play the move king to f2 on the next move. My rook on over here on h1 would be free. Here the best move for black was knight to bd7. But what black did in the game? He played the move f5. Now he's threatening to pin both of these pieces. So move the knight back. And here you see that these or three of the pieces of black are still on their initial squares. And white's all pieces are roundabout developed. So white's threat is still a5. How to counter it? The move was in knight d7. And he played it. Knight d7. Now a5. And now white is saying that my queen is coming to b3. My knight is coming to a4 and over here b6. Challenging your knight on d7, then my bishop would be coming over here. If blacks wants to play this move knight c5 over here, I'm going to take it with the bishop. This knight is doing nothing. If you see this black's position, this rook is doing nothing, this bishop is doing nothing, it can't be improved. This knight can't be improved. This queen can't be improved. This rook can't be improved. This bishop can't be improved. But what can you improve? And that is this knight. And the best move in this position was knight f6. But he played the move knight c5, threatening the bishop. Now your bishop is threatened. Create a plan. How to counter it? The move which he played in the game equaled the position. And he played the move b4, threatening the knight. But what was the best move? And the best move was bishop into knight. Because now after d into c5, now you see this queen is coming to b3. He will be controlling this diagonal. This pawn is free to move. This knight is coming to a4, threatening this pawn. And this knight can also jump to b6. And this was the best sequence of the moves. And now black's threat is playing the move knight f6. It was the time to play the move knight f6. But white has a winning advantage even in this, just only on 16th move. But in the game, he played the move b4. And now, remember, in King's Indian defense, black players tried to take your white bishop, which he took. Knight into bishop check, queen into d3. Now, black is threatening two things, whether playing the move b5 or he wants to play the move queen to d7, controlling this diagonal. This diagonal. How to counter these threats? White has two threats in this position. One is b5, the second one is queen d2. How you are going to counter it with black? Till this knight is doing nothing, it was time to bring the knight into the game. But he played the move bishop to d7. And now black is threatening to play the move rook c8 or bishop to b5, challenging the queen. Now black has two threats, rook c8 and bishop to b5. How to continue? What is the best move for white over here? And the best move for white in this position is to play the move queen to d2 or just he castles. These are the two best options for white. But what he did? He played the move castle. And this was actually a mistake by white. And from this game, you will understand that how the players, 1900 rated players, make mistakes. 1800, 1900 rated players make mistakes. Below 2000 rated players. Now he castled into this open file. The king wants to go to on the next move b2. Now black has the opportunity to bring his knight over here to f6. Or he can just pin this knight to the king. But what he did? He just played the move bishop to e4, threatening the rook. Wherever the best move in this position was rook to c8, pinning the knight. King moves to b2. Now what? It was time to bring the knight over here in the game. Knight f6. Rook defends this open file. Now black takes the pawn. F into e4. Now what? Knight g4. And here you see that now how Black has taken control. This knight is coming over here. This rook is controlling this whole f file. And here, black had a decisive advantage, but he played the move bishop a4 in the game, threatening the rook. Save the rook, rook d2. Now, at last he played the move rook c8, king b2. See, this bishop is misplaced. King wants to play the move a3, challenging this bishop. So, bishop b5 was played. But this was not the best move. What was the best move in this position? Have you forgotten this knight? Still it is saying that let me bring me over here to f6. Bring me in the game. If the knight to f6, white does not win the pawn. How? Because now e4. Now e4. Challenging the pawn. And this bishop will be opened. Sorry. Over here. But instead he played the move bishop b5. Now knight into bishop. You can take this knight with your queen into b5, or whether you can take this with the pure pawn. Which one is better? Choose. One of the move wins and the second of the move loses. And the best move in this position was a into b5. The reason behind is that this white's whole king side squares are weak. This rook is coming to c4. On the next move, the queen is coming to c8, protecting the rook, controlling this whole diagonal. If anything happens over here between these two pawns, this bishop would be opened. And here, black has an edge in this position. But instead, he played the move queen into b5, and that was the losing move, because queen into b5, a into b5. Now you understand if black's position here, his all pawns are weak. On g6 it is weak. This pawn on h5 it is weak. The pawn on d6 is weak. The pawn on b5 is weak. This bishop is controlling this diagonal. This bishop can come over here on b6, controlling this square of the protection of this pawn. This pawn can move forward, open up the position. This rook is alive, can come into the game by just playing the move, for example, rook to c1, challenging this file. Knight c3 was played. Now this knight is attacking this pawn over here on b5. What is the best move in this position? Black played the move rook c4, threatening your pawn. You have to protect it. King b3. Now f into e4. Now you have three ways to take this pawn. One is with the knight. The second is with the pawn. You can take it with the pawn. And the third is that you can pick up this pawn on b5. Calculate. What is the best? Are you going to take it with the b5? Knight into b5, taking up this pawn. Are you going to take up this pawn? What are you going to play? And the best move in this position was knight into b5. The reason behind is that because if now rook fc8, or instead this rook, black's rook is threatened on c4, he has to protect this rook. and he is going to lose all of these 3 pawns. And if he protects it, rook f8, now knight into d6, and the game is over. If he gives the check, king a4, you are going after the rook d8, threatening the knight. He has protected both of the rooks, but what is the problem? Have you seen? What is the problem? Bishop c5. Now, this king is coming upside. This pawn is being threatened. And white is winning. But in the game, he took it with the pawn. Rook d8, protecting the pawn. Now the best move, black is saying that I'm going to play the move bishop f8. Going to protect this pawn once more. But don't you see that this pawn is still weak? And the best move in this position was to play the move knight to c3. But he missed it. Instead, he played the move bishop b6, attacking the rook. He saved the rook. Till it was time. And now black is saying that I'm going to play the move knight to f6, challenging your knight over here on e4. How to counter the threat of black? He's saying that I'm going to play the move knight f6. How to counter it? Remember, this pawn is hanging on b5. So, knight c3. And here white has a decisive advantage, because now he played the move rook to f7. The point of rook to f7 was that he wants to bring the rook over here to f4 and threatening this pawn and threatening this pawn also. What is the best move in this position? How to counter black's move rook f4? There are two moves. One is the best, the second is the good one. And the best move in this position was you're going to take the check. How? You're going to play the move knight into pawn. If now he brings over the rook over here, now knight into d6, pick up the pawn. He gives you the check. Kings come over here. This square is being protected. Now you are going to pick up the pawn. And if he picks up this pawn over here, now rook into rook, rook into rook. Now knight into pawn, and these pawns are going to queen. But in the game, he played the second best move. Did not allowing the rook to come to f4, and the move was bishop e3. And now bishop is protecting the f4 square and the d4 square. And now white's threat is picking up the pawn, and there is no way that black can stop it. Now he played the move bishop f6. Now he is threatening the pawn on h4. But I want you people to pause the video and think that what is the best move? The best move is you are going to give up this pawn and going to grab all of these pawns. So knight into b5, rook into h4, rook into h4, bishop into h4, knight into d6, rook t7. And here you have 3 knight moves. One, knight to e4, knight c4, and knight into pawn. I want you people to think that what happens if you take this pawn, b7. In scenario of that you have these 2 pawns and this passed pawn. If you take this pawn on b7, it is winning on the spot. Knight into b7. Because now rook into b7, a6 threatening the rook. Rook has to move. Rook d7, now b5. And there is no way to stop these pawns. And white is completely winning. But in the game, he went out for the move knight c4. Going after this pawn on e5. He protected it by the move, bishop g3. But it was better over here to give up this pawn to get some activity. Still, white is winning. But why? Bishop g5 was better. Because after bishop into g5, knight into g5, knight into e5, now rook d6. This rook is protecting this pawn on g6. The king is coming over here to defense. If this pawn moves to f4, this knight can jump over here on e4. But still, white is completely winning. But here he just defended his pawn. Now you have position and how to continue. Black is saying I am going to play the move knight to f6. How to continue in this position? What is the best way to continue? And white played the move knight b6, threatening the rook. Rook has to move, rook d8. Now white played the move king c4. The point of this king c4 is that this pawn is protecting both of these squares. This rook can't give check over here on c8. These pawns are free to move b5, b4 pawn. And white is just saying that I can maneuver, for example, over here, knight to a4 to c5 and going to pick up this pawn. And he is also saying that I'm going to control this square over here on e5 also. Black tried to exchange the bishops, but he played the move, white played the move rook e2, now knight f6. Bishop into f4, pawn into f4. Now it was better over here to play the move b5 immediately, but white went out for the move rook to e5, protecting the pawn. Now he's threatening to play the move rook e7, so king f7. And here b5 at last. And here white is completely winning. Black tried desperately, and because now the exchanges works out in white's favor. And these exchanges made white's job more easier. I'm going to show you the rest of the game because it does not require any type of further instructions or details. King c5, challenging the rook. Rook moves back. Now g5, a6, pawn into pawn, pawn into pawn, g4. Now king c6, challenging the rook. Rook a7. Now king b6. Rook d7. Now a7. Rook d6 check. Now king c7, challenging the rook, and the pawn is going to promote. And in this position, black resigned the game. And from this game, you have understood that how a players at 1900 rated players, 1800 rated players, 2000 below 2000 rated players think, and how to counter your opponent's threats, how to understand that why he made this move and what is his threat, how to understand the threats. So if you like my video, kindly subscribe, like, hit subscribe and hit the bell icon button. Thank you very much.